Okay, in Affinity Photo, raw development is done in 32-bit unbounded float with a linear color space. Now, without getting too complicated, this ensures that the editing environment is of a high quality and lossless, which means no information is discarded. Now, by default, when we click Develop here, the image is converted to a 16-bit integer format, and that means that pixel values outside the range of 0 to 1 are clipped, so we no longer have access to them. Now, for 99% of use cases, this is absolutely fine, since we will have shaped our image tonally by this point anyway. I prefer to do minimal work with the initial development and go for a very flat image that I can then manipulate further in the main photo persona. But some people will prefer to do the majority of their work whilst developing the raw image. There are many approaches, and none of them are wrong. There are some scenarios, however, where we might want to carry on uninterrupted with a 32-bit workflow throughout our entire editing process, and Photo allows us to do that. So I need access to the Develop Assistant options, and I can actually do this without having a raw file open. All I need to do is go to Assistant Options up here and click Develop Assistant. Now, if we look on the options here, we have an option Raw Output Format. We can change this to 32-bit HDR, and you'll notice it automatically switches the tone curve off. This is important, as the tone curve would clamp those values outside of the range of 0 to 1, so it needs to be kept off. Now, having set this option, we can reload the image, so I'll just close it down and reopen it. And just before we push on, you'll see I accessed the assistant options here. You can also get to them straight from the Develop persona if you already have a raw file open. So just a little note there. Okay, so by reopening the file, let me demonstrate the benefits of keeping our workflow in 32-bit unbounded. I will completely ruin this image and push the exposure up by 5 stops. Then click Develop. Ordinarily, I'm sure you'd agree, this would be unsalvageable since much of the tonal information is clipped here. The benefit of this approach, however, is that all this information isn't clipped. It simply exists outside the range of 0 to 1, so all we need to do is bring it back. To do this, I could jump back into the Develop persona and drag exposure back down by -5 stops. So then, with tricky images like this, where we have a dark foreground and a bright sky, we can also use tone mapping to compress the tonal range, and that's accessible through this option here. Even the default settings will give us a better blend between the foreground and sky, so we've got a much better starting point. Now, it's worth noting that you can do this in 16-bit, but with 32-bit, we can also pull in any tonal detail that might have usually been clipped. Alright, so just a couple of things to note before we round this video up. One is that the majority of filters and adjustments and tools will work as expected in 32-bit. With the exception of median blur, bilateral blur, and dust and scratches, you'll be able to take advantage of all the usual functionality you'd expect to use. You can also use all the blend modes too, but just be aware that some may behave differently in a linear color space environment. Now, the second point is that Photo integrates really well with video and CGI workflows. If you're only interested in photography and general image editing, this is where you might want to switch off. But if we go to View, Studio, and 32-bit Preview, we'll expose this panel, and I'll just click drag it out here so we can see it better. This allows us to preview portions of the unbounded tonal range and also perform gamma transforms. By default, we're previewing this linear color space document with a typical display transform, which means it's gamma corrected to 2.2. Switching to unmanaged, however, will give us a linear representation at gamma 1.0. And additionally, we can use the OpenColor.io display transforms with a valid OpenColor.io configuration. The final thing is that with a valid OpenColor.io configuration, we can convert losslessly to another color space on export. Say you're processing background plates for compositing work. It's vital that the images stay in an unbounded color format all the way through the pipeline. So we've done the first part, which is ensuring this image has been processed losslessly in 32-bit unbounded. And we now need to convert its color space to, for example, ACES-CG. We can just go to File, Export, choose EXR here. I'll just shift this panel out of the way. And the default settings are fine. All we need to do is click Export. And what I do is, when we come to name the file, all we do is append the color space name to the file name. For example, I might add underscore ACES-CG. And Photo will then perform the color conversion based on the transforms specified by the OpenColor.io configuration. You don't have to add an underscore. You could simply add a space followed by the color space name, but old habits die hard for me, and I just underscore everything. Okay, that's about it for this video. I do hope you found some of it useful. If you'd like to know more about 32-bit and OpenColor.io, check out the other videos here, and thank you for watching.